Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Richard Grannon and Friends. We have today the pleasure of Dr. Paul Taylor joining us again. Thank you very much for coming in, sir.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to start with the hardest topic, but I'm going to do this in a philosophical way, which I think actually it protects us. It gives you plot armor as a character in this podcast.
I'm not convinced, but continue.
We'll try. So, the Israel Hamas conflict.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because I've been asking myself this, philosophically, is there a way that we can approach this that doesn't rely on prejudicial thinking, that doesn't rely on our previous conclusions that we've already given ourselves about the subject? Is there a methodology that allows us to approach this in a way that is trying to be fresh, trying to look at the situation as it is today?
I would give you a very odd answer to that.
I'm expecting one.
In the sense that what I've been working on recently, you know my shtick for a while, and it's partly your fault because you asked a question about what are the consequences of people not reading anymore,
yes,
which is what I'm fixated about.
Yeah.
And that's been bugging me for ages. So I went back to things like the Hebrew Bible,
yeah,
and the Old Testament, as we would call it. And also just the idea about reading proper literature.
Yeah.
And why I mention that is because I'm sure viewers and listeners are thinking, what's that got to do? That, the least thing to do with Hamas Israel. Except you've intimated, if you try and discuss the issue,
yeah,
there isn't a discussion.
Right.
And I would suggest part of that is, don't get me wrong, I don't want to be misquoted in any shape or form. A lot of what's happened in the recent debate is virulent, terrible anti-Semitism. And I'm not excusing that for 1 second. What I would say, though, is that it's not an excuse. I'm just there's a reason, an explanation, the difference in an explanation and a justification.
Yes.
So I'm not justifying it in any shape or form. It strikes me, though, that it's confusing symptom with cause to think that the current anti-Semitism has anything to do with the actual conflict.
Okay.
Because the vast majority, when they say from the river to the sea, you can go on YouTube and see people when they say to some of these protesters, which river, which sea, they don't know.
Okay. So
that would be one immediate issue I'd raise, is the lack of literacy, historical literacy in this sense, geographical literacy. They don't know why they're so angry. So that's one section of the protesters.
Okay.
The other section, there are virulent Hamas Islamist anti-Semites.
Okay.
So that's fueling, that's a whole other, that is partly what you're alluding to also, is the long history of anti-Semitism from that quarter. But not that I'm mostly interested in it, but what I find, that I don't think you're ever going to solve.
So to be specific, what you're never going to solve is the strain of just knee-jerk anti-Semitism that underlines a lot of the narrative around
the
this.
Islamist anti-Semitism, I can't see a quick way. And one of the reasons to take it back to the issue of literacy is my reading of Islamism in the West is that it's predicated upon a fundamentalist reading of the Quran, which cannot be altered, cannot be changed, and it isn't up for discussion.
Yes.
Why I've become increasingly interested in the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament is that I'm fascinated by actually how surprisingly up for grabs interpretations of it are.
Okay.
And even if you're a fundamentalist reader of the Bible, which there are surprisingly few, it's fueled the whole of Western culture and how we understand literature and how our culture is absolutely immersed, whether we like it or not. And this is something Tom Holland, the historian, has spoken and written a lot about. Whether you like it or not, Western Europe and America is a hugely Christian-influenced, old Bible-influenced culture.
Yeah.
And that is, within that culture, there is ambiguity, there is interpretation. And again, bringing it up to the present, what you see is a lack of discussion, a lack of nuance. You have people who, it's the purity of so they're acting in an anti-Semitic way, but my reading of it is they have this Stalinist-like a desire to have a purely left-wing moral conviction that they are right. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's Israelis and Jewish people who are the target. So I think it's partly accidental. It happens to be Jewish people because the October the 7th events occurred, the horrific events then. And there was silence. Even Gary Lineker for once shut up, which is a minor miracle in itself. So he managed to shut up for 2 or 3 weeks. And then the Israeli retaliation occurred. And then the virulent anti-Semitism comes out. So the Israelis and the Jews got a honeymoon period of 3 weeks. And when I say honeymoon period, they weren't subject to anti-Semitism for about 3 weeks. Because even the worst of the British and American left realised, maybe we shouldn't say anything at this point.
So I have to do something a bit daft, but it's again plot armour for us. You don't like the death of innocent civilians, regardless of their religion or culture. Isn't that true, Dr. Paul Taylor?
Absolutely. But and again, when I say but, it's so easy to be misinterpreted. What's happening in Gaza is horrendous. But one of the problems when you try to discuss any of this is the way in which public discourse has evolved in recent years is context isn't allowed. So the minute you try and talk about context, the whole point about cancel culture, you can't refer to history because you're fact-shaming people.
Oh, sorry.
It happens at universities now. If you correct someone...
The term for this is called fact-shaming?
Fact-shaming. Seriously, haven't you heard this?
You shame them with facts?
Yes.
And that's a crime?
Well, it's ideologically oppressive. It's patriarchal.
To stick to the facts?
Yeah.
Why did you leave academia again? Okay. So let's go back. Because obviously it's an incredibly sensitive subject.
Oh, sorry. Can I finish that thought?
Yeah, go on. Sorry. Yeah.
So if I can give you some of my own personal context, because I don't want anyone to think I'm virulently anti-Palestinian, whatever. I taught a lot of left-wing political theory for my whole career. When I was a young student, I knew a lot about, unlike a lot of the students now, I knew about the Balfour Declaration. Yeah. I knew about the partition. And I've always been largely sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Yeah. And there were issues that would annoy me, not so much the Israeli state itself, but the behaviour of settlers. Yeah. Over quite a few generations now has sometimes been quite outrageous. Yeah. Egregiously bad towards the idea of, I've had slight problems with, for what it matters, who cares what I think, but the notion of the right of return. Okay. So the fact that Jewish people anywhere in the world had a right to return to Israel. Okay. But you could be a Palestinian who'd been dispossessed within recent living memory and you wouldn't have a right to return. So at the time, that struck me as, somewhat fundamentally, intrinsically unfair. But to be honest, everything for me changed with October the 7th. Right. Absolutely everything. And again, it will give you, it goes back to my strange starting point about why does it matter that people don't read? There was a poem, and I believe most Jewish people and every Israeli have heard of Chaim Bialik. And he wrote a book called In the City of Slaughter. Sorry, he wrote a poem, In the City of Slaughter. And it's a very famous poem. And the first line is something along the lines of, arise and go to the city of slaughter. And it was based upon a pogrom in, is it Kishinev, I think it is. Apologies if I've got that wrong. But it was part of what's now modern-day Moldova. So Kishinev was a city in modern-day Moldova at the time in 1903. It was part of the Russian Empire. And there was a pogrom where I think, I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but it was a very small village, but about 50 Jews were murdered, women were raped, and loads of people were attacked and badly injured. And then I think 2 years later, there was a pogrom as well in the same city. And in that period of history, in the Ukraine as well, there were a series of pogroms that were basically warm-ups for the horrible events of later years with the Nazis. So Bielik wrote this poem, and it's a very, very powerful poem. And I've got a book from 1924, which a woman called Helena Frank did a very odd translation. But I'm trying to remember the first couple of lines, something like, of steel and iron, hard and cold and dumb. Hard and cold and dumb. And it talks about walking into, forge thyself a heart, and, O man, and come, and walk into the city of slaughter. It was a very odd translation. Most Jewish people won't be familiar with that translation because it's completely different to the normal translation. But it's a heartfelt, and there's a version online that people should go and read. And why I mention all this, what's a poem got to do with anything? Why it's so significant is you read that poem and it's very, very similar to what happened on October the 7th.
Of steel and iron, cold and hard and dumb, now forge thyself a heart, O man, and come and walk the town of slaughter. Thou shalt see with waking eyes and touch with conscious hands on fences, posts and doors, on paying in the street, on wooden floors, the black dried blood commingled here and there with brains and splintered bone. Good Lord.
It's horrible. And sorry, this isn't the standard translation, which we could talk about that another time. I'm fascinated by the act of translation.
Yes. Yeah.
That was an odd translation, but an interesting one. Halfway through the poem, there's a baby suckling that's killed. And there's I'm assuming it's the narrator, or I'm assuming it's a man's walking through this town in the aftermath. And I haven't seen all of it, but I've seen some of the footage from October the 7th that most people have, some of the video footage. And the similarity, the parallels are horrible. So my point is, if I was Jewish, and I'm familiar with that poem from I think he wrote it in 1904, the events of 1903, 120 years later, almost the same horrific things are happening. And that was my revelation, that I've often been slightly suspicious when people said Jewish people deserve the right of return no matter where they are in the world. I was thinking, that's unfair. You can't have your cake and eat it. I've often thought Jewish people saw anti-Semitism everywhere. And I thought, no, you're being, the equivalent of being a hypochondriac, you're being hypersensitive. And it dawned on me, unless you're Jewish, unless you're familiar with that type of poetry. And again, why poetry? Why does poetry matter? Because poetry, not so much poetry, but the written word for Jewish people, it's what kept Jewish people together for 3,000 years, carrying the Torah around during the diaspora. And I think of all the peoples on earth, Jewish people are probably most text-based, most word-based. And I'm always going back to your question to me, why does it matter that people don't read anymore? Well, the flip side is reading kept the Jewish people together, despite this type of horror. It's the thing that kept them together. It's the thing that gave them their identity, no matter how widely spread they were.
Because they're a people of a book.
People of the book. And in Western terms, the blue herd crazies that are jumping on the Hamas bandwagon, we've had this conversation before, but largely functionally illiterate. They are not people of the book. And I'm not claiming just because you read, you're somehow so much better. But my point is, there's a certain type of reading that's open to ambiguity. A certain type of reading that you learn. The minute you read difficult literature, you realize there isn't a single truth. Everything is contextual. Which doesn't mean there isn't a truth. I'm not being a postmodern relativist, but I'm just pointing out, there's jokes, if you want 4 opinions, have 2 Jewish people in the room. This idea that Midrash is the Jewish tradition of interpreting texts. And Jewish scholars have argued for centuries over very small issues. And that's what I've always loved about literature.
And isn't this like part of the more positive, self-deprecating Jewish stereotypes. Perhaps it would be claimed that's why they're good at stand-up comedy, and why they end up as psychotherapists often, is this tradition of arguing over the most minute detail with absolute fervor and passion.
And there's also an interesting thing, and I'm not selling religion to people. I am a devout agnostic for what it's worth. You've had, I think, a similar Catholic upbringing. Yes. I don't think you have the faith anymore.
No.
But intellectually, I'm very, very comfortable. And the stuff I'm working on at the moment is the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Greco aspect of it.
Oh,
so the Greek...
God bless you. May the gods bless you.
Well, the Greek, Roman and Christian tradition.
Wonderful.
And how that's so crucial. Yeah. And sorry to keep repeating myself, but the blue-haired crazies, they have separated our culture. They are the manifestation of our culture moving away from literacy. And people don't think it matters until, I think, increasingly look on the streets and see it matters.
Yeah.
Because these people don't understand history. You can't engage, to go back to how you started this chat. How do you engage with people who have a Stalinist conviction they are right from the get-go? I don't see it. Whereas I can take you to passages in the Old Testament where there are just many different interpretations. So I'm working on, at the moment, if you know the Tower of Babel story. From memory, it's only about 18 lines of verses. It's very, very short. And it's absolutely, you begin to unpack that. It's an absolutely fascinating story with fascinating implications. To give you one little example, the idea that God somehow punished when they built the Tower of Babel, so high it was going to reach the heavens. The common understanding is God punished people by destroying the tower. And no, read it. Basically, God had said to people, go forth and multiply, go and spread around the world. And what the Babylonians did wrong, in a sense, was they tried to concentrate in cities. And they had one, I'm working on this in such detail, but there's a cuneiform in the Babylonian Empire, was this one overarching, almost like Esperanto, it was the universal written language. So there was this whole focus about one language, one massive Babylonian conurbation. And the idea implicit in the Bible is that you go forth and multiply, you need diversity. You need to spread out. You need to have different languages, different modes of thought. And what I'm suggesting is you think of that from 3,000 years ago.
Is that really what that Tower of Babel story is about? Well, God said, or it could be.
This is This is my point about interpretation.
Okay.
You will get 50 people now saying I'm talking nonsense, but my point is there's a legitimate story to be told.
This is really, really important. And it's vibing with some of the thoughts that I've had recently. Could you possibly pull up the Tower of Babel story, please, mate?
Because the point I'm trying to emphasize is, again, what's he on about? What's this got to do with anything? We are living in a time where there is a univocal ideology.
Right.
That's almost like Babylonian cuneiform. You're not allowed to deviate.
This is interesting. We don't talk that much, and yet we every 3 months I'll meet back up with you, and we seem to be on the same page. So there's a word homogenous. Is there a word homogeneity?
Homogeneity.
Homogeneity. So there's a. I want to pick you up on a few points here, but just to say that we seem to yet again have come to a place of for me, it's for the social media. So your thing is post-literacy. I'm very concerned with social media. This homogeneity that social media usage creates is incredibly fucking dangerous.
Well, remember a while ago when we don't chat that often, which we should try and rectify. Yeah. But I had to go at you about using a Kindle.
Yes.
And this is, so...
Yes.
For listeners and viewers, I have worked in technology from my PhD was about computer hacking. So I'm not going to take lessons from people on being a technophobe. I'm not.
Right. Yeah.
I have an iPad. I'll explain how I use it in my the way I read and stuff. I use technology all the time, but I don't have a mobile phone because I don't particularly, I'm a misanthropic bugger, but also just be on a train, look about and see how many people are looking at a screen.
Yeah.
I'm able to, the thing about iPads more so is that it's slightly atemporal, asymmetrical. You can choose, asynchronous. You can choose when to go on a laptop or you can choose when to go on an iPad. I use my iPad far too much, but there's still a choice. I can leave it in a different room and go and watch telly or go and walk the dogs. Yes. A mobile phone, people are never off it. And we could talk maybe about, because you're really into your fitness, I'm obviously not. And this is one of the things I've been writing small bits about, is that people don't think anything of, what would you say when people exercise? In an average, it was 2 hours a day for people who are really into their exercise.
Yeah.
That's not excessive, is it?
Hour and a half, 2 hours. I mean, it depends what you're doing. But if you are a gym goer and you love it, you're in there for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Right. So over a week, you're talking a good 10 hours.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about use of technology, there's the people are willing to spend 10 hours of their life doing something non-technological. But if I said, so I'm working on Proust at the moment, and I'm working on it, we'll talk about it later perhaps. So I'm working on this book that's basically about all the ridiculously long books that you should read, but you never will.
Yeah.
And why you should read them.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons people never will, one of the reasons people won't go and look at the Old Testament is that the idea of actually spending the amount of investment of time into reading is somehow unrealistic. They're not going to do it, but they'll spend 10 hours a week at a gym.
Yeah.
Now, just working out on a very practical level, I don't know what people's reading speed is. I read about 100 pages an hour. If I'm just reading, I'll read 60. I always have a pencil, I'm always making notes. So I do about 60 pages an hour making notes. But let's say that even if someone's a relatively slow reader, they're doing 40 or 50 pages. Well, those 10 hours, that's 500 pages a week.
Yeah.
You could read you could read War and Peace in 3 weeks.
Yes. At that rate.
At that rate, if you spent the same amount of time reading as going to the gym.
I've found myself, I heard myself do it a couple of times, saying like, if I read a book, I'll say, and I read it cover to cover. And I'm thinking, what kind of a weird, have you got like some insecurity? Why are you telling people that? And then when I thought about it, it's because I know perfectly well that in the modern world, when people say, I read that book, they did half the audio book, a couple of Wikipedia entries, and they've read the book. And I know that they haven't. I just read cover to cover, Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. I do say cover to cover with Nietzsche as well, because also that's hard. It was painful. And people will tell me they've read Nietzsche, and they'll always say they've read Beyond Good and Evil. And I'm like, why have I never heard then the amazingly funny passages about Nietzsche taking the piss out of the English, how we can't dress, our women walk like farmers, we can't sing, really funny, and praise for the Jews. They're not chapters, they're not written in chapters, they're written in sections, Nietzschean sections. Praise for the Jews, praise for Jewish culture, open, full-throated, absolute praise. They're in a sense. I've never heard anyone. So you've got in my world, YouTube videos that are saying Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil is an essential text. And I'm thinking, if you'd really read that, wouldn't you, none of you have brought this up? It's quite funny. You know, the stuff on the English, it's a total piss take about English culture and how dreadful we are and how we can't be bothered with this, but good-natured. And then because if you go into Google, through the search terms, you'll see people will ask, was Nietzsche an anti-Semite? And then there's a lot of hand-wringing and people, well, we don't know, maybe. Read him. Let him say. It's right there. So that's why I say I've read it cover to cover, because I really think people are saying, I've read that, but what they mean is, I skipped a few chapters. I skimmed it. And
just while you're on that topic, just to give people a sense that, you know, how non-technophobic I am, and also how exponentially and ridiculously pretentious I am. So I'm not totally against audiobooks.
No, I'm not.
So I'm doing work on, I'm going to keep saying I'm doing work on, because I'm working at the moment on the notion of the Western canon. So I'm looking at all these difficult books. But James Joyce.
Okay.
Now, Finnegan's Wake, Ulysses, these type of books actually help to hear them sometimes because of the way he uses language.
Right.
Samuel Beckett, I am a really, really miserable person. And I actually enjoy reading Samuel Beckett.
I didn't argue with you at all. Well, I just sat there politely looking at you.
But we'll talk, if you let me talk about Valmar Shalamov later on. There's a funny story about how miserable you can be, or I can be. But with Beckett, for example, you listen. If you read Beckett plays and you're unfamiliar, it's sometimes difficult to know what's going on. But you listen to Beckett on an audio, a well-performed, and there's some brilliant actors have performed Beckett. It brings it alive like you wouldn't believe. So there's one play, Krapp's Last Tape, which is absolutely brilliant because he does a lot of stream of consciousness. And if you ever go on YouTube and find there's Samuel Beckett, there's a performance called Not I. And it was the female actress Billie Whitelaw was one of his favourite actresses.
Right.
And it's a curtain and it's just a mouth. So they do a scaffold behind the theatre curtain. So they position her mouth right high up. It's about 8-9 foot. And the stage instructions are very specific. And it's big white lips. So they're painted lips. And all you can see, the whole theatre is dark and there's one spotlight on the mouth. And it's a stream of consciousness. I've forgotten for how long, but approximately 20 minutes maybe. It gets faster and faster and faster. And it is absolutely awe-inspiring. It's stunning. Reading it, good luck with that.
Yeah.
But to see it performed.
Yes.
So anyway, so that's one example of how audiobooks work. I'm reading the Divine Comedy, Dante. And what I'm doing there is there are all these different translations. So I did Spanish like you did. You can actually understand quite a bit of Italian through Spanish.
If it's written.
Yeah. So I got the original in Italian. There's 3 or 4 different translations. And just observing the differences is fascinating. But then also with an audio book, you can actually, I listen to the Italian original being spoken in Italian. So you're getting everything.
Yeah.
You're getting, because it's terza rima, it's this da-da, da-da, da-da. You need that to hear it. Then you read it in Italian. Then you read the translation. So it's a bit of an effort. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But what you're getting back, because the technology allows you to hear a brilliant Italian speaker bring this alive for you. And you can get good translations. So the technology can be double-edged. But in all of this, like you and I, without pumping ourselves up, we're not typical. And you refer to YouTube. If you find a YouTube discussion of Nietzsche, it's performative.
Yes.
People are talking about Nietzsche so you don't have to read him, is what you were basically saying before.
Yes. Yeah.
And the people, it's entertaining to see intelligent people talk about stuff. But I think a lot of people watching some of these discussions would be shocked if they did what you suggest, if they actually read the original.
Yeah.
So Stephen Hicks is a bête noire of mine. He talks about Nietzsche a lot.
Yeah.
A sophomoric understanding of Nietzsche.
Yes, I listened to Nietzsche and the Nazis by him, and I was like, wow, this is GCSE level. And
he'll have hundreds of thousands of views, and it's a profound. I don't because it sounds. I'm going to insult him, whatever I say. He's either doing an honest job awfully,
because he's not very bright,
or he's deliberate. He's bright enough to misrepresent it in a convincing way. So he's either being manipulatively deceitful, or he's heraldically thick.
Yeah. Heraldically thick.
And honestly, because it's that bad. And he talks about postmodernism. And it's I don't have a go at Jordan Peterson because I like it, in lots of ways what he does, I admire. But, Jordan Peterson has a sophomoric understanding of what postmodernism is. But I don't want to go down that road.
We did do it once before.
It's like Tourette's with me. Postmodernism. So let's move on from that.
And it was highlighted in the debate, the so-called debate between our mutual hero, your friend, Slavoj Žižek, when they were just sat there talking across each other about communism, Marxism, and postmodernism one using the correct definitions and one using, I don't know, like coloured by crayon or... they were just wrong. The definitions are just wrong.
But you've seen, I gave a talk with Žižek in London and I witnessed firsthand the frisson. People get excited because it could be Žižek, it could be Jordan Peterson. Any public intellectual today, there's a frisson in the audience that's palpable because they're bright people talking about fascinating ideas.
Yeah.
But it's like a shaman now because people don't read. This is why I'm always bringing it back to the fact that people don't read.
Oh, he's the... Yes, he's the one wise man in the village. He knows magic. What do you mean? He takes that thing and there's words in the thing. There's people in there. No, there isn't. These lines, they mean things. No. Yes. He's making it up. No, he's really reading. Yeah. That like a shaman, as in the one fucking guy amongst a bunch of shit-kicking farmers who can actually read a fucking book.
And I would say one of the modern versions of that is, and I used to know huge tracks of poetry off by heart. My memory's shot.
Yeah.
I was telling you before about too much Nigerian Guinness. But if you can actually quote 3 lines of poetry, it's the modern equivalent of walking on water. Seriously, how many people do you know can quote big chunks of poetry?
I quoted in a debate not that long ago. It was Macbeth, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. People's jaws dropped. Yeah. I'm like, A, I got half of that wrong. And B, I only did 50% of it. But the fact is that Shakespeare? Yeah.
Well, God bless my late father. He left school when he was 14, 15, but he did the To Be or Not To Be soliloquy when he was 7.
Wow.
And he died and is about 85. He could recite it to his dying day.
Amazing.
And again, why does this matter? It goes back to this thing about the October the 7th, the response to it. I think the Jewish visceral response to what happened on October the 7th is based upon deep cultural affinity with texts like the Bialik poem. To be Jewish is to know this stuff in your soul and in your guts. To be a blue herd yeller on the streets requires the exact opposite. You know no poetry. You know no history. You're not prepared to discuss anything. All you have is this Jacobin purity that you are right.
And the reduction to slogans.
Which, you don't even have to go on to the trans issue, but I was watching recently to try and make this very specific to people. Is it Dillahunty?
I think that's how you say it.
No, there's a guy online who does debates almost professionally about atheism. He's a professional atheist. I think he's Matt Dillahunty.
Yes, yeah.
And
could you just check that? I think if I'm thinking of the right guy, then yeah.
Well, he did a rage quit recently.
Yes.
Because he's got a complicated private life. But I saw him, he did a debate with Dinesh D'Souza, who's an interesting character.
Is it this chap? American atheist activist, yeah. He's done a rage quit recently.
Yeah, with is it Andrew Lawson or something? I'm useless on names, but there's a professional wind-up merchant who's a Eastern Orthodox apologist. He's an American guy, but he's part of the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Oh, okay.
And he's very obnoxious, but very, very bright guy. But so I'm jumping around, but this Matt Dillahunty was in a debate with Dinesh D'Souza, and it was about religion. And it was about belief in God. And Matt Dillahunty's constant position is to say, I'm about reason. I'm about rationality. You're talking about this bogeyman in the sky. How ridiculous. And then Dinesh D'Souza started talking about trans issues. And Matt Dillahunty just started talking over him, saying things like, a trans man is a man. And, trans people, trans women are women. And I'm thinking, well, now who's not being purely logical?
Yeah.
Who's now not being purely factual?
Yeah.
Who's now asking you to believe in something that's not scientifically based?
Yes.
And
reducing the whole nuanced debate to a slogan, a meaningless slogan.
And he played to the gallery, and you hear the audience are on his side. And Dinesh D'Souza, you could see him thinking, I'm not going to win this one.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's not about then how clever you are at debating. It's about, can I beat that slogan?
Yes, a slogan's a big club to bash somebody over the head with, and you can just repeat, whilst they're trying to form high resolution analysis with nuance and uncertainty, as you said, and interpretation built into
I'm trying to keep dragging this back to October the 7th because I'm trying to talk as widely around the issue as possible. Give it some focus.
Yeah, I did say to you, how do we, before we even get into what do you think, what do I think, and the death of civilians, how do we frame the debate? And this is all completely relevant to frame it. Before we begin the debate, how do you frame it?
And this is my point. You're talking about and I am, obviously, there will be more moderate people who you could have a discussion about the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate, all these historical facts and complicated issues. But generally, I don't think it's too much of a caricature when they shout from the river to the sea. Go and do. You can see on YouTube vox pops, people talking to what river, what sea. Do you know? They haven't got a clue.
And is Israel in the way of that river and that sea? I mean, and then what's the implication?
Yeah.
What is the implication?
So why I mentioned the Bialik poem was, my point is, there are two different responses to October the 7th. There's the visceral Jewish response based upon familiarity with thousands of years of the written word and emotional connection to things like the Bialik poem that are incredibly powerful. Because guess what? This isn't the first time they're at this particular awful party. This has happened before. And the point about the blue-haired people who have no sense of history, no sense of literature, how can you feel, empathize? How can you even begin to think about October the 7th? I would suggest what happened during October the 7th was so barbaric that most of us, I won't, if someone said, here's a video, I won't watch it.
I'm not watching that stuff. No. It lingers.
I don't understand if some Jewish people wanted to bear witness.
Yeah.
But I know I've read enough
I'm good.
to know that this is, I'm sorry, I can't watch it. No. But how, as a privileged Westerner, some of the people taking a pro-Hamas viewpoint, how they compartmentalize what happened on that day is absolutely beyond me. And then the point would be, well, how do you compartmentalize what's happening in Gaza?
Yeah.
And the only way I could explain it is there's a coldness does descend. When something like October the 7th happened, I get the strong sense if I was Jewish, I would basically be saying to myself, whatever it takes. You know, they've said it before, but never again. And what's happening in Gaza, you know, if children are dying, they're children, for God's sake. So I've always thought it's like debates about the death penalty. When there are miscarriages of justice or when terrible things happen, that if I believe that something is still the right thing to do, that's on my conscience. But I won't pretend it hasn't happened. So I'm prepared to say, look, who knows? I'm no military commander, but I would still side on the Israeli side because of what happened on October the 7th. But I'm fully aware of the horrors that also what happened in Gaza. The difference is, I would suggest, there seems to be this Western cultural amnesia already about what happened on October the 7th. How you can criticize the IDF whilst never fully acknowledging, fully discussing what happened on October the 7th is beyond me.
I just heard Douglas Murray making that point yesterday. We've looked at the response, but not at the initial wound that created the response. And in the field of narcissistic injury and narcissistic abuse, that's called reactive abuse. So you only look at the response of the victim. You only judge the response of the victim. You don't look at what was done to the victim before their response came, and it's a narcissistic tactic. And in saying that, I'm not taking a side. I'm not taking a side. I don't want humans to suffer. So all I can trot out are trite aphorisms because I don't understand this properly. In the beginning, I would have said it's asymmetrical and the response is disproportionate and it's irresponsible and looks genocidal. And then as time went by and I thought about it more and more, and the way I tried to frame it was because I'm a bit thick and a former bouncer from Liverpool, if it was a sci-fi movie, because you get movies like Dune, books like Dune that become movies, and they're about real people. They're about real cultures that I'm putting a fictional. And I say, okay, if you try to do that here and take away your, Richard's, prejudicial view of everything that's gone before and everything of your understanding of the world, Balfour Declaration, you called it the right to return. I also have very big questions about that. I mean, I don't buy it either. And yet the question that came back to me was, What would you have them do? What would satisfy you? Okay, so now go on. You're in the driving seat. Go and tell them how to respond to the threat that they face. I do think the response is disproportionate. I do think you're looking at decades of belligerence and mistreatment of the Palestinian people. And yet I don't have an answer to that question. What should they do? Sit and wait? Let it happen again? The nature of the conflict on the ground, and even the geography counts, how close they are, the tunnel system that's underneath it. The fact that so people say they have such a young population there. And I'm like, yes, young and open to radicalization, as all even young people in the privileged West are, because we're talking about radical leftists, they're radicalized. Of course they're pro-Hamas. Why would they be anything else other than pro-Hamas? If you're young and you have the big enemy, of course you would be. So then you have a largely pro-Hamas population who are saying we have to eradicate, not fight, not push back, not fight for our rights with, but eradicate that state. So my question to me, and I haven't answered it, what would you have them do? What would you like them to do? And tactically, you're saying you're not a military commander, neither am I. Do you go back and reoccupy? And what good would that do?
Well, I think the revelation for me was, and I'm from at the sidelines, but you mentioned you haven't, taken a side. I think I did, for what it's worth. Who cares? But that October the 7th, I took a side. This isn't negotiable. This isn't, let's try and find a middle way. This isn't Keir Starmer bullshit.
Yeah.
This is existential. And we use the word existential. I've studied existentialism. The concept of an existential threat. If you want a definition of an existential threat, watch the bloody videos from October the 7th. And regarding the Gaza situation, yes, it's terrible. But one thing I haven't seen often discussed is, why won't any nearby Muslim countries take those incredibly vulnerable Palestinians?
He asked, knowing the answer.
Well, no, for example, the Sinai Peninsula.
Yeah.
If you cordoned that off, if the world got together and paid Egypt an obscene amount of money and said, give that to the Palestinians, and that would be some type of geographical, practical solution.
Yeah.
Just brainstorming.
Yeah.
Why that? That's never going to happen.
No, it's never going to happen.
Right.
The Egyptians do not want them.
Right. And it reminds me, to a slight tangent, I saw Douglas Murray give a talk in somewhere like Abu Dhabi. And God, he's brave, because the audience, the presenter was biased against him, badly biased. She was an Arab lady from memory, or Lebanese or something. The audience were giving him a hard time as a Western colonialist. He had a black American professor doing the whole diversity spiel at him. And he was getting it from all sides. And I'm watching this, and then I realised, hang on, every member of the audience has stood up and given a Muslim-centric criticism of Douglas Murray.
Yeah.
And they're talking about British attitudes to refugees and stuff. And I'm thinking, there are parts of the Middle East, like Lebanon, that they've taken in huge amounts of refugees, like ridiculously. A third of the population is suddenly a refugee in certain parts. But there are very, very rich oil states who have taken zero and have done absolutely nothing.
The UAE, where I was living, when October the 7th happened, I was there. Had I walked down the street anywhere in the UAE and shouted Allahu Akbar, Free Palestine, and waved a Palestinian flag, I would not be sat here now. I would be in prison. Because in the UAE now, if you criticise any country, if I criticise the UK or anywhere, it's a potential 7-year prison sentence. Potential 7-year prison sentence for a public criticism of another country, and no criticism of Israel.
Well, we're catching up in this country. If you use the wrong pronoun, it's probably about 5 years now. But you can burgle people's houses at will.
That's
and
okay.
PC plod, well, Well,
that's decolonising the capitalist space, isn't it? To burgle someone's house. And I was stunned by the response. I was like, I'm in a this is a Muslim theocracy. This is an Islamic theocracy. It says it on the tin. They're not hiding it. You can live here, but it's a Islamic theocracy. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I'll follow your rules. I'll live inside of an Islamic theocracy for the trade-off of what I get from being there. But I was stunned by the silence. Like, nobody's saying anything. And this is a bit of my opinion. I think framing this as religious now, based on the developments, the recent developments in the Middle East, is disingenuous. Meaning, if you say this is about Muslims versus Jews, it really isn't, because where are my Muslim brothers and sisters of Ummah? Where are they in this? Yemen has done something and said something. That's it.
Well, can I give you an analogy? In the 1980s, I spent a bit of time in America, and I'm Liverpool, born and bred. My father's mother and father are from County Clare and County Kerry. So in terms of blood, if you want to use the Nuremberg purity laws, I'm much more Irish than 90% of the Irish rugby union team. They were all, mercenaries, most of them.
That's why you've gone back to your Guinness via Nigeria.
But I would have this constant problem, because it's what you've just said. It makes me think, why is the Muslim community in this country so pro-Hamas? And it makes me think it was when I was in America in the 80s, the number of arguments, because I'm an argumentative sod, but I wouldn't take any crap from Irish Americans who at that time were supporting the IRA.
Yes.
So I think what they called NORAID, they gave support to the IRA. And you might remember there was a little boy, was he 3.5? He died in Warrington. That was after I came back, I think. So until not that long ago, the IRA were bombing on mainland Britain.
Until not that long ago.
The little boy who died in Warrington was Catholic. So I just had these arguments with Irish Americans. And my point is, Irish Americans had this need to overcompensate because they were distant from the actual geographical entity of Ireland.
Yes.
So they had to be more Irish. You go to an Irish bar in America and it's this surreal, hyper-real, more Irish violins nailed, crucified to the wall like Christ.
Yeah.
Tricolours everywhere, oversized unit. Yeah,
which by the way, Irish people hate.
Yeah.
They hate all that. They think it's very silly.
Except this is one of the ironies. There's this hyper-real thing where there's a load of bars in Dublin that are basically Irish theme bars because Americans would go to Dublin and say, this isn't Irish enough. Yeah. So
where's the bicycle hanging from the ceiling quaintly?
So the American reinvention of an Irish pub has reinfected Dublin.
Yes. Yeah.
And because you want the tourists to realise this is, and on it goes.
You have to scream at them, this is Ireland.
Do you think that might be an explanation why the British Muslim and the American Muslim community are so... But I think because nearer the actual geographical area, there will be Arab Israelis much more reasonable.
Oh, you've opened a door here. Shall we go in? We'll go through the Islamic door. So yes. So to reiterate your point, so that people know what you're talking about. My father was born in Pakistan. He was born in Rawalpindi. I like saying that to Uber drivers in Dubai because like one in three of them will go, brother, you don't look very, you should get some sun. Or I'm like, no, I'm white. But my father is Irish and he was the son of an Irish soldier and they were stationed there. And I was talking, I've got Pakistani mates here and some Pakistani mates over in Dubai. And what's happening and what's been happening for a long time in Islamic culture, let's say, because people say Islam, like it's one homogenized product. It is not. Emirati Islam is not. Egyptian Islam is not. Tunisian Islam there are different interpretations in different cultures. Saudi Arabia first arrested their Sharia police and told them to stop enforcing Sharia law, I think as far back as 2016. Can you check that? Saudi Arabia arrest Sharia police. They're now going to permit alcohol in Saudi Arabia. So the hub of Islam, and particularly Sunni Islam, and particularly where it's that more bitter, resentful, violent and extremist breed of Islam, it comes from Saudi Arabia. It would be called Wahhabism or Salafism. Well, the home, there's that from 2016, thank you. And they must be more kind and gentle. And they didn't, it says they stripped the religious police. When I say they arrested them, they, not all of them, but the heads, they put them up in a 5-star hotel under force and said, you have to stay here and we're not doing this anymore. So Saudi Arabia and the UAE, year on year, in a competition for white Western tourists, are becoming less and less strictly Islamic. So yes, at the source, well, Saudi Arabia is the source of, that's where you go on Hajj. That's the source. It's becoming diluted in favor of a new religion, or the religion, which is money. So the big thing here, when I said I don't, like we can talk about Muslims versus Jews, it's important, but I think that's the level of the foot soldier. The foot soldiers think, oh, this is a religious war. At the highest levels, I think these people, I'm a conspiracy theorist, I suspect there's a lot more collusion at the highest levels, and the big thing is money. The big thing is just money. So to come back to your point about American Irish being more Irish than the Irish in that hyper-real way, for years now, since I used to live in Malaysia, which is a Muslim country, and there's a lot of Pakistani students there, back in 2009. And then you would see the modern Pakistani, the modern progressive Pakistani is not the same as people here from Pakistan. That's the culture that we have. Most Islamic people, most Muslims in this country are Pakistani. They've got the actual Pakistanis from Pakistan is way more progressive. It's calm. It's open. This is not Salafist, Wahhabist, death to the kafar Islam. This is, brother, do you want a cup of tea? You want to hang out? Come to my house. So welcoming, so warm, as they're supposed to be, as is correct in Islamic culture, because if I'm Muslim, I'm supposed to invite you. I'm supposed to say, look how civilized we are. If I'm talking historically, we are the civilized ones. We are the most hygienic. We have this structure. We have this discipline. We have science. We have progress. Join us because it's better over here. Don't you agree, brother? There is only one God and his name is Allah. Come to us. It's that style when it's in Pakistan, not everywhere. I'm not being a utopian. Obviously, there is aggressive, extremist Islam there as well. Of course, the average Pakistani person is just living their life and saying, yes, I'm Muslim. If you're interested in Islam, I'm not going to proselytize to you, but I can tell you. Here, you're surrounded by the kuffar. You're surrounded by whites. They drink, they eat pork, they're promiscuous, they're not religious. They don't even follow their own religion. These people don't even understand their own religion, following Christ, who's one of our prophets, I would say if I was a Muslim. Look at the decadence. Look at the degeneracy. What can we say? I mean, yes, they are actually, in some of their analyses, right. And it breeds a combative stance, and it's not welcoming. It's not, come and join us. It's cool over here. We want you because we're supposed to invite people to Ummah. We're supposed to bring people in. We're going to fight you. We're the minority inside of a body that is a foreign body that is not warm to us, and we're not warm to it. And so, yes, you then become, they made movies about this years ago, 3 Lions, about how ridiculously over-characterized some British Muslims could end up being because they're trying to be more Islamic than people from Islamic countries. To
back up what you're saying, what exacerbates the whole situation is in the major British institutions, so let me get my Tourette's abhorrence for the BBC out the system. But in places like the BBC or TV executives, what fascinates me now is attitudes prevalent within the BBC or in TV advertising strike me as the guilty conscience of white public school boys being manifested visually. So you watch TV adverts in the UK now.
Oh, God, go on. Go on. Well, go on. I'm not standing on that landmine.
I'll happily stand on it. My understanding is, and if my statistics are out of sync, please let me know. But approximately 15% of the UK are from ethnic minorities. Yeah.
Goodbye, YouTube channel.
No, and it's not. I'm quite happy to say this because I'll tell you exactly why. Go on. So out of that 15%, I think about 5% are Afro-Caribbean or black. In the adverts, apparently there are only mixed race families now. But interestingly, I can't remember the last time I saw an advert, someone with a turban. You very rarely see anyone Chinese.
Oh, no. Yeah, go on.
So
I won't stop you.
No. So there are, and for example, I don't often get the sense that I'm watching in TV adverts traditional Nigerian British families. My point is, it's a very, very specific London-centric concept of what an ethnic minority is.
It's got the facts and figures up on screen. According to the 2021 census, the total population of England and Wales was 59.6 million. Oh, I need to stop saying 66 million. 59.6.
So I said 5. It's actually 4.
Yeah. Yeah. But to watch adverts, there's very few white people in it. It's ridiculous now. But
my point is, and again, it's not that I'm keeping count, believe it or not, but it's got to such a stage that you're thinking, hang on, what are they trying to tell us?
Okay.
And it's a guilty conscience of TV executives, which isn't healthy.
No, which we can prove because, just to back up in case people didn't catch your point, we don't see Sikhs.
No.
But there are Sikhs here. We don't see Chinese here, but there's plenty of Chinese here, and there have been for hundreds of years. Like in Liverpool, they've been here for hundreds of years. There's a certain type of representation. You said you don't see a Nigerian family in traditional Nigerian dress. You don't see that. So they'll say, we'll give you diversity, but of a very certain type. And it's it's like a weird, you said guilty, pathological fever dream of diversity.
But it's the worst form of patronisation.
Oh my God, it's patronising.
No, but you're patronising a section of the population because you haven't got a clue. So when I say, like, how would you know they're a Nigerian family? But how about a visibly African family, probably the mother shouting at the kids to get back to read the Bible?
Yeah.
Really, Nigerian mothers.
With a sandal off ready to...
Seriously, Nigerian mothers, the Nigerian mothers I've met, had scared the bejesus out of me.
Bible in one hand, sandal in the other. Just to beat
but that is not a form of
Yeah.
ethnicity that's acceptable to TV executives. It's a real part of being a British black African. But why wouldn't that? Because guess what? Christianity, what you were saying before, Christianity, never mind anti-Semitism and Jewishness, Christianity is, we basically now we have blasphemy laws in this country.
Go on.
Well, we've never had blasphemy laws. But now, recent events, teachers going into hiding, things have happened in this country where you do not say certain things.
Because there's a new religion in town.
Yeah. Whereas you can say from the life of, when I was a kid, the life of Brian.
Yes.
Now, that couldn't be if it went to the University of Sacrilegiousness and got an emeritus professor's in being sacrilegious. That's a pretty blasphemous film. But guess what? Christians saying, oh.
Well, it's only mocking Christianity, and that's allowed, and they're all white men, and they're silly anyway. So
except one before I forget, one aspect of, do you remember that there's a section in The Life of Brian where he decides he wants to be a woman?
Oh, yes.
And now, how things changed. That was the height of ludicrous.
But you haven't got a uterus. It's ridiculous. Yes.
Not according to Matt Dillahunty.
Yeah. So, okay. We covered a lot. I have a lot of notes here that I want to come back to. What I suggest is we take like a quick minute break and then gather the thoughts, and then we'll be back in 1 minute. So we're going to explore the biblical corpus, as it were, to reinstate the position of the father and rescue him from the belly of the whale, eh? Young men are treated so terribly, and it's just too much to bear. I really went into Kermit the Frog. Kermit the Frog. My Zizek's better than that. Okay, this is from the...
Pure ideology.
Pure ideology. I love it. It's beautiful. The Tower of Babel, or what? Perhaps you know it. I don't wish to borrow my Jewish friends. He always has friends everywhere, doesn't he? My Chinese friends, they told me. I'm like, what Chinese friends? Come on. So, the Tower of Babel, people trying to build a way to heaven. This is from Mormon website. After the floods, the people began to disobey God. Some of them did not believe God's plan. Without asking God, they started building a tower to try to get to heaven. Is that correct? They were trying to get to heaven?
Well, this is, I think, it's a kid's version.
Kids version.
Because, again, it's one of the things, and it's a while since I've looked at this, so please forgive me, but one of the things that it says in the original is that they were trying to make a name for themselves.
Go to the original, please, mate. Let's have a little look.
Because that's what's interesting, that they wanted to be known for posterity.
Could you actually, if you look up, it's called Bible Gateway. Bible Gateway. This is where I go when I'm exploring the biblical corpus. There we go.
You go, yeah.
Now the whole world had one language. Does it start before this?
No.
It starts here.
Chapter 11.
Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. Okay, they found a plain in Shinar. Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. Let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Yeah. Oh, the egotism there. Otherwise, we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth.
And remember, God had said, go forth and multiply. So God
That's
wanted
just before
people,
this, in Genesis.
This is the idea of the Jewish tribes separating and going out. And this is the point that God wanted the people's, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
And one of the things that, again, if you're not religious, this might be a massive turnoff. But I was reading, I can't remember the name of the guy. There's an American scholar I was reading, and he basically said the problem with the Bible is it's being taken over by religious people. And his point, but what he was trying to say was that actually, if you think of the Old Testament as a humanist tract, that's like, rather than a big bearded God in the sky, it's actually more of a Freudian projection of human values. The credit is given to a transcendental being. But basically, the whole of the Hebrew Bible is this humanist tract. In lots of ways, it's a human story that they've then projected onto God. So one of the points I'd make is that you can be a devout agnostic like me and still treat the Bible incredibly seriously.
So here's another little, what do you call it when you go off track? Not a diversion. Tangent, thank you. When I read the book of Job, and I read it naively, I was like, just take it for what it is. Don't forget what you think you know. What is this? And I read the Garden of Eden story in the same way a few times over the years. I might cover this before, I'm not sure. But I was like, to me, this reads like theatre. I think perhaps this was supposed to be performed for people. So if you read it as text, it has one meaning. If you read it almost
I dispute that. It has layers of meaning.
Sorry.
And often contradictory.
Yes, I'm sorry. That was incorrect. What I was trying to say is, if you take it as like, this is direction for a film, this is direction for a play, this is poetry, this is a mystical revelation, this is history. These are all, you told me, epistemes? Epistemes, which is the way in which you can understand in a period of time, in a chapter of history. And whose is that?
Foucault. Who, if you mentioned that, Stephen Hicks would have a heart attack. God forbid we should learn anything from Foucault.
Degenerate postmodern Marxist. So I looked at it and I was like, what is this? Let's say this is to be performed. Let's go with that. And it's not to be taken religiously and on faith. When it says in the Garden of Eden story, or first of all, it's funny. The book of Job is funny. Satan flies up to heaven and goes, do you want to bet with me?
But that's also, interestingly, it's not necessarily Satan as we understand it.
Right.
From memory, I think if the original Hebrew, and this is it, if you actually
read the book.
I wish I read and spoke Hebrew. No, because the Hebrew language is so crucial to all of this.
Yeah.
But I believe the concept of that Satan isn't used as a personal name.
No.
Satan, I think, was an advocate.
He's an adjudicator.
Exactly.
Adjudicator, yeah. Yeah.
So again, people get off on the wrong foot thinking this Satan
is the devil with the horns, with the tail.
No. He's more like, ironically, the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
But not the devil himself.
Yes.
Now, the minute you understand that bit of extra context, that opens up whole new realms of meaning.
Because maybe at that time, intrinsic to Jewish philosophy was the idea of maybe some kind of a Socratic method. You have to have an opposition to know your position. So then Shaitan that's my philosophical adversary, so that I can know my position. Maybe. I don't know. But that, I was just making the point. It's kind of funny, the idea that he flies up to heaven and throws down a challenge, and they place a bet, and then they gamble on some poor guy's life, and he's the most faithful person God has. And he goes, God's like, he's not going to break faith. And he goes, he is. Go and test him then. Gives him boils, gives him plagues, kills his family in the name of some stupid bet. So the thing I was just going to say, backing up the thing, that it might not be faith-based. And we might not be able to see or understand. We might just not be capable of reaching to the way they interpreted it at that time. But one of the things I wanted to say is, when it says, and God said, that just meant, and it was so. So if that was an automatic interpretation, especially with the Adam and Eve story, I take that as like a story of human evolution. Like you said, it's humanist, that we were like animals. We had no shame. Like cats walk around naked. Dogs, sorry, Freudian slip. Dogs walk around naked. They don't know. They can't sin because they don't know anything. But then with time and experience, you change and you grow. And it's, for the ancient Jews, and God said means immediately, and it came to be, and it was so. Because to them, God is, maybe, I'm just positing an idea, maybe it's like a pantheistic view. It's like God is reality. God is that which is, and that was what was. And if God said, then that's just what it's not. To come, because you mentioned the Greeks before, I'm wondering if part of our corruption in the understanding of all this is like a Greek corruption. Gods are sort of human entities that you can argue with, and they can get in a bad mood, and they can fly down to earth because they're horny and turn into a swan and have sex with a woman, and they get involved in human drama. Whereas maybe that's like an overlapping of something, or an outgrowth or a mutation of it, where there's something original here that's not about submission to a supreme being.
There's a German philosopher, Sloterdijk, Sloterdijk, I think. He's a difficult read, but he has one of these ideas that basically myths and certain religious texts are like human, it's like our immune system in a cultural sense. So how do you deal with existential questions?
That's great.
So how does your body deal with external threats, bacteria, etc.? You build up an immune system. Well, if you think of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, Greek myths, as this human cultural immune system, it's how over time meaning has become sedimented through the generations.
Right.
And you're right, it does. It's very difficult for us to understand it as the ancient Hebrews would.
Yeah. But
that's one aspect. The other aspect is the fact that we still understand so much of it.
Yeah.
3,000 years later, it's still...
Yeah, it's
amazing.
It's not totally missed. We're not sat there going, what are they talking about?
But there are the thing about layers upon layers. So, for example, you're talking about the Garden of Eden. I'd suggest that God, being as wise as he was, must have known this idea. It's a false presentation. I'd suggest the idea, the tree of knowledge. It's set up, it's your point about the dramatic nature of it. It's set up that Eve tempts Adam and they take from the tree. But if you think about it, how could it go any other way?
Yeah.
Because if you stayed in the Garden of Eden forever,
yes,
you're not truly human.
Yes.
To human is to err.
Yes.
To human is to make mistakes.
And that's why I'm probably not making the point that well, because I'm not bright enough to do it, but that it's not saying Eve was bad or there was, it's just, and it was. Maybe a theatrical metaphor for what did happen. And I don't know back in the day when they took the archetype of female, because we've got the Gnostic text, haven't we? And the archetype of male. When Eve chooses that, does she represent curiosity? Does she represent the growth of wisdom? Is there some archetypal thing that we're missing? We go, oh, it's Eve, it's a bird.
Well, I'd be a bit more blunt. I think men tend to think that they're todgers. That's what Eve's representing.
Well, but is that like, yeah? So is that But is it one person? Adam is doing this. Maybe like the crude way of being like that's the right side of the brain. This isn't true. We know this isn't true anymore. And the left side of the brain, the intuitive side, not true, but okay, is Eve. And then the intuitive side says, I wish to explore.
We're jumping off here, but I did send you, and I'm sure you haven't read it because I send you endless amounts of rubbish. But there is a fascinating, people need to check this guy out, Ian McGilchrist. And he wrote, the first book he wrote was called The Master and His Emissary. And then he wrote, I think it's called something like The Matter of Things, which are 2 big volumes. But the Master and the Emissary sums up his argument. But he came from a literature background, but he became a neuroscientist. And it's your point about the left-right side.
Oh, okay.
It's about the hemispheres. And he basically argues, I always get them mixed up, but people who are right-handed, like I am, it's the left-hand side of your brain controls the right-hand side of your body.
Yeah.
But the left hemisphere of the brain tends to be more organized towards grasping things. Science, basic, it can be quite intellectually like conceptual, but it's not about ambiguity. The right side of the brain that controls the left hand is more about, you're saying, intuition, creativity.
I think I swapped them, didn't I, there?
Seeing patterns.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Leonardo da Vinci, I think there's a disproportionate number of creative musical people, for example, are left-handed.
A lot of actors are left-handed. Yeah.
Because it's so, and he's at pains. He's a neuroscientist. And I think in his second 2 volumes, he quotes 6,000 scientific papers to back up his case. So I'm very comfortable talking
He's a
about.
reader.
Well, I'm very comfortable talking about literature and stuff. That's, my shtick. But he's looking at it from a neuroscientific point of view. And to bring all this back to the present day, what he's suggesting is we live in a culture that is privileging the
left side,
the right-handed left hemisphere.
Okay.
Not seeing complex patterns.
Yes.
So blue herd ideology.
Yes.
Not seeing complex patterns. Literature encourages senses. The Bible encourages sense of ambiguity. We've just been debating the Garden of Eden because it's not clear.
No.
The story of Babel isn't clear.
No.
It's encouraging you to metaphors or a way of seeing the world. It's trying to interpret it in a more complex patterned way rather than. But if you want to build a bridge, you don't want complex metaphorical patterns.
No.
You want something that works.
Yes.
And McGilchrist's point is the human brain has always been the fact it's divided bicamerally into 2 sections. It's asymmetrical, the brain.
Yes.
That in itself, he points out, is just fascinating. Most developed animals have this divided brain. And the point is, so these 2 things are always going on at the same time. But our culture has rapidly overprivileged the left-hand side of the brain. And this goes back to what earlier on we're talking about mobile phone use.
Yes.
The fact that people don't read anymore.
Yes.
They're not engaged in literature. They've become more and more Babylonially, ideologically driven.
Yes.
There's only one cuneiform truth.
Yes.
There's actually, quite a strong neuroscience argument now to suggest that this is getting worse. And he cites some casual empiricism, but if any listeners are, involved in educating young kids, the number of kids entering school now that are having trouble recognizing facial emotions, they're not autistic, but they're actually, because there seems to be, as a species, we're actually, in some senses, going backwards. We're emotionally less developed because of some of the over-focus upon narrow aspects of modern technological life.
There's my friend, Professor Ed Dutton, the evolutionary psychologist, he's told me a number of times that we're dropping an IQ point every year at the current rate. 1 point a year, according to the IQ specialist. I don't understand IQ tests that well to be able to check it, but that's what he's telling me. It's an IQ point a year, which is rapid. If I've misquoted him, I apologize. But also
IQ tests are, it's a whole other realm of that. They're measuring a very narrow sliver.
Yes, but it's still, I agree. I would argue it's a meaningful data point. It's a significant data point. Bring up the Tower of Babel, because we're into our last half hour and I have about 50 things that I need to ask Paul. Let's do this Tower of Babel thing because it looks like your premise is the right one. So go on, make it big again, he said.
Sorry, we've just morphed into Benny Hill skit.
If as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city.
But sorry, to stop you there, when it says on line 5, but the Lord came down to see the city, and this is one of the funny things, the Lord wouldn't have to come down.
What's the Lord? Is he like Darth Vader or Emperor Harkonnen flying around the ceiling?
God as an omniscient being doesn't need to come down anywhere. He knows exactly what's happening. So this is part of the levels of meaning and how seriously do you take the idea.
Yes, yeah. And scattered them all over the earth. They stopped building the city because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Now, you said to me on the break, it is short, the Tower of Babel story, that I think you said it on break and we should say it on the podcast. You are pedantic enough to go and read the published work by Hebrew scholars that interpret these, and that Babel might have meant channel.
Yeah, I need to reread. It was a long time since I read the article, but we get the word Babel, and the idea is from the word Babel. So the idea of this confusion of languages, but there's, I think it's from the University of Jerusalem. I was reading this paper where he's suggesting that there is a word, he's tracing the etymology of the Hebrew and the Babylonian, and he's arguing, I think it was the word channel. And I think the city of Babel was in this confluence of these rivers, and it's why people came together into a conurbation of the city. So he's arguing that Babel actually might be more to do with the concept of people being channeled together. And that's what Babylon did as an empire. That's what the Roman Empire did. It channeled people into this unilogical, there's one way of doing things, the Roman way. There's one way of doing things, the Babylonian way.
Yes.
And we now have the new Babylonian woke ideology. There's only one way of understanding. In the guise of diversity, we will never have diversity ever again.
There's no diversity of thought, only diversity of
But this is fascinating because the Tower of Babel is there is only one language.
Right.
We're back. We've actually regressed.
We're going backwards.
We're going back to only one language, no genuine diversity.
And if you step outside of the rules of that language, you're guilty of blasphemy and brought up on religious crime charges effectively.
Yeah, and I just think I think I said at the time, it's roughly 18 lines, are probably about right. But there is so much in there from such a short text. And the point is, this was saying about sedimented meaning over time and over centuries. This means, so we can talk about this in relation to woke, whereas your ancient Hebrews wouldn't have that experience.
No.
So this is one of the fascinating aspects of there's the actual need to translate into other languages, but there's also the need to translate into the time you find yourself in.
Speaking of the time, obviously there's original African-American woke, which we've discussed before, which was being aware of systemic racism in America. Now a bunch of white liberal privileged kids have reappropriated that. We have white woke, which is the mess of radical leftist ideas mixed in and not very well understood. Is this a result of World War II? Meaning we saw the totalitarianism of Stalinism and of Hitlerism on the rise. It was defeated, let's say, or fell in on itself. We, the British colonizers of the world, said, that's bad. All forms of totalitarianism and empire building are bad. Let's not do that. And therefore, in a sense, that set off, so it's a big explosion, a big event, and then it pushes a sort of a tidal wave of consciousness in a certain direction that then just goes too far.
Well, it's more, ironically, if you want to go back to the book, the wisdom books, so Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
And this is one of the ironies. There is nothing new under the sun. So I was reading about, again, all these difficult books I'm looking at. Dostoevsky, in the Alexander II, in the Russian Empire, Tsar Alexander II, Dostoevsky's writing, I think 1861, the serfs were emancipated. And it's a very febrile time in the Russian Empire. And it gave, right at this period, that you will have heard the phrase intelligentsia. That actually meant it has nothing to do with intellectuals.
Oh.
which is misleading. But I've been reading the various ways this author was trying to explain what it meant. All it meant was how loyal you were to the party line. At the time, there wasn't the Communist Party, but in the early days of radicalism. So Dostoevsky's writing against these early radicals. He was one himself for a short period of time. But he's writing against them. And what he's saying is, to be part of the intelligentsia, all you had to do was be loyal to the current radicalism.
Which would have been...
was anti-culture. So there's a story that Tolstoy kept his count, he used his title all the time to annoy them.
Right.
Because to be part of the intelligentsia, you just had to be loyal to the idea that everything had to be torn down.
Oh, so intelligentsia was the woke of the time.
Yeah.
They're saying we are the illuminated.
This is my point. So my point is, if you were living in 1860s in Russia, the current woke trend would be nothing new. You would recognize it.
And this is...
I'm sorry, I'm back because my bugbear about people don't read anymore. These intelligentsia would pride themselves. So what is to be done is at Chernyshevsky. There was this famous book that was one of Lenin's favorite. It was a really atrocious, like a Mills and Boon novel for revolutionaries. It was awful.
What's it called?
What is to be done?
Okay.
And it was this radical. So it was cardboard cutout characters, but they were revolutionaries. And this is what, and Lenin swore by it. And people like Turgenev and Dostoevsky, these brilliant writers, Tolstoy, were just thinking it was an absolute joke of a book.
Yeah,
it was hilariously bad.
Yeah,
but this is the point. Its artistic merit had nothing to do with anything.
It was the exposition of the cardboard cutout characters that were just spouting whatever the political narrative of,
and there is something, it's the purity, and it's happened in Mao's China. The purity, it happened in Pol Pot in Cambodia. It is quite, and when I worked in a university system, I very rarely got given a job of any responsibility. But if you're ever in the belly of the bureaucracy, there is something very seductive about knowing the whole weight of that bureaucracy is behind you.
Right.
So I could tell a colleague, you have to do this, knowing if they argued, I could bring down the weight of this bureaucratic behemoth. And that is the purity. So it's got, and I knew some very, very nice academics. The minute they entered the bureaucratic mindset, they became horrible creatures. And we've discussed this before in terms of the Nazis and in terms of Stalin. When the bureaucratic mindset, it's a horrible, pure. There's a purity. There's no ambiguity. We're talking about ambiguity in literature. The point about bureaucracy is it reduces everything to a widget that fits within a system of widgets, and everything has to be treated the same. And you can see how this led to the death camps. This led to Kolyma, the area of Eastern Soviet Union where they sent people to the camps. The Klima River, they called it going to Kolyma. The mentality, so it didn't matter if they were Nazis, didn't matter if they were Stalinists. The mentality is the same. It's this bureaucratic, there's the horrible racism that was intrinsic to Hitler. But beyond that, if you were living under Stalin or under Hitler, it's a bit of a Hobson's choice, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you have evidence of people switching sides during that time because I think we look back on the ideology through history. It's epistemes.
Epistemes.
So the episteme that we live in now can't be that different to World War II, but it probably is different in some significant coordinates, right?
Well, what scares me, if you think back to Pol Pot, year zero, you think of all the things these totalitarian mindsets want to do. The first thing they want to do is destroy history. So year zero, take everything back.
The end of history.
Yeah, destroy the Tsar system, which they had good reasons. It was a horrible system, but the French Revolution, the irony was with the French Revolution, they had to recreate religion. They had to invent a new religion because they realized, oops, we've got rid of everything that means anything.
Yes.
So Robespierre created this mad religion.
Based on...
the supreme being, I think they called it.
Yeah. Almost like an Illuminati style thing, wasn't it? It was
just Catholicism lies. It was,
right.
but let's take the priests away. But let's recreate this nonsense.
Yeah.
And this to me is this. But when you take everything away, when you take context away, when you take art, literature, the genuine intellectuals, so the intelligentsia, get rid of the real intellectuals. All of this is designed to genuine debate, genuine ambiguity, genuine nuance. All of these things are gone. So what are you left with? Purity of thought. And it's this enjoyable sense. Darkness at Noon, Kessler's book, it's an amazing psychological insight into, because people caught up in this in Stalin's time, people would actually, the higher ups would periodically be thrown in Lubyanka prison.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, but they still enthusiastically sometimes took part in their own show trials because they didn't want to betray the revolution.
Yes.
And they said, well, I must have done something wrong.
Yes.
And that's how deep it gets into people's souls.
I don't know if it's historically accurate or if it's just like a bit of artistic license, but in the movie Death of Stalin, before people are executed, their final words before they're shot are praise of Stalin. It's whatever the equivalent of the Heil Hitler was.
There's a fascinating, there's also why you think about it, for such an atheistic structure like Stalinism, why do they need this overinvestment of the emotionality of the victims?
Yes.
To almost convince Stalin and his cronies. There's an excess, isn't there?
Yes.
There's an excess sadism.
Yes. Oh, God, yeah.
But it fascinates me why. Why aren't they just happy with the fact they have ultimate control?
Right.
Why do they have to have this excess? It's not just that we execute you. We have to execute you with you singing our name.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I'd suggest is that's what people underestimate about the whole woke thing. There's some type of emotional investment in being right. People think they're correct. People think they're pure.
Right.
And there's an emotionality that I think people don't realize how important that is. Because in a Western culture now that lacks religion, that lacks literature, that lacks these sources of meaning, this is where people are getting meaning from.
And is the excess born of revenge? It's got to be some kind of emotional impulse that predicates the excess.
I think it's you're the psychological expert. I think it's partly sadistic. Sadism is enjoyable.
Yes.
But it provides meaning, even if it's sadistic meaning.
Yes.
If you've taken history away, if you've taken context away, if you've taken ambiguity away and you're left with purity of meaning, that in a world where religion no longer matters to a lot of people, that provides you with a lot of solace. I can go on a march now with my friends and shout slogans and feel part of a communal body that's lacking in any other area of my life.
I'm sure there's euphoria in that. I'm sure there's a great sense. I think it appeals to us as human beings. I think there's a lot of reward.
But historically, going through religions and all these forms of meaning, that was the human cultural immune system finding ways to create structures to channel these type of emotions. And my point is, well, we've lost a lot of the cultural channeling and we're left with these really dangerous, inchoate, pure things. Anything that's so pure just makes me so suspicious.
Yes, and one of its symptoms, I was going to say, is certainty. When people are very, very certain, I'm like, where'd you buy your certainty from? Can I go to the Asda and buy some certainty?
I think you're a bit like me. I will argue with myself. Get to a certain point. I'll start, you're talking rubbish. Who's that?
Shut up, you're talking rubbish. Why would you think that? Yeah, I have that. You've got me on this excess thing. I know there's something there, and I'm going to have to, in my own time, come back to it because there's something there. And I think if I've got this intuition, if you unlock that, you'll probably see what's really motivating the totalitarian systems and the real desire. And it will, if you unlock it, you'll reveal the hypocrisy.
But I'd counsel against always thinking there has to be a proactive motivation. My thoughts are leaning more to the notion that, to repeat, because we've taken away a lot of traditional forms, very powerful. So the wisdom books in the Hebrew Bible, this is condensed wisdom of millennia of people. The Greek myths, human experience condensed down and down and down.
Yeah.
And there's real wisdom contained within it.
Oh, God.
And we as a society have said, sod all that.
Sod all that.
We are going to recreate some weird, simplistic, sloganistic phrases, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is some Maoist... The Maoist Red Book is back in Human Resources Department.
The strange thing of all that, because I was in a talk in Croatia recently, and now Croatia, the Balkans, slowly is getting a taste of the woke mind virus. And a woman who's there, a white woman, very sincerely asked me, when I see foreigners here, I notice I have racist thoughts. Help me to deal. How do I fight this racism that is inside of me? And I said, don't. Don't try to be anti-racist, because that's like pinching a blood vessel. That leads to intellectual, spiritual anemia. Try to think, what am I experiencing? Here is a foreigner. I'm not used to foreigners. I'm raised Catholic in Croatia. I'm surrounded by white people. Now as a foreigner, I'm having a thought. Be kind. So I'm saying, my point here is don't engage in not something. To try to not be something is absurd. It's always going to be anemic. It's always going to lead to neurosis. Try to be kind, try to be rational, try to be reasonable, critique your own thoughts, try to grow, fine, but don't try to not do something.
Well, you don't have to be Freud to think there's a lot of danger to be found in repression.
Right.
We both went to Catholic school.
Yes. Yes, we know. We know the madness that can ensue. We've got 15 minutes left and I have about 3 hours worth of questions. So good luck to me. This thing of literacy and needing to read, what's the benefit? Why should I read a long book?
Well, I'm not having a go at you because you now in my mind are representative of all life coaches everywhere. But I'm genuinely fascinated why literature hasn't been used in life coaching more. And tell me whether it has. I'm assuming it hasn't. No. And
we're the shortcut brain hack people if it's life coaching, yeah. But
you know, if my dream is some rich Russian oligarch installs me on his yacht and basically says,
we're here, we're ready.
Discuss Dostoevsky with me 4 hours a day. The other 2 hours you can play backgammon with me and I'll set up a dartboard and we'll have a fridge full of Nigerian Guinness. Just saying, if there's any...
Here is his fantasies.
If Oleg is out there...
If Oleg's out there, mate, we'll wait for the call.
He sold a few gas companies. I'm your man. But seriously... for example, I'll give you what I was talking before about, the amount of effort you'd have to put in to read difficult books. If you look at À la recherche de temps perdu, In Search of Lost Time. Now, it's different formats, but there's a short modern library edition. There's 6 volumes, and so they're relatively short paperbacks, but thick. 6 volumes, just the text, if you ignore all the notes. Not that I'm a nerd, but it's 4,374 pages. But if you divide that...
Don't be scared, read a book.
No, but 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
Now, most people haven't read In Search of Lost Time. But if you said, right, to the people who haven't read it, what do you know anything about it? And most people will have heard about the story of the Madeleines. Have you heard of they're like little cakes? And the point is... It's about, in the paperback version, about volume 1, about 60 pages in. The book starts off, he's a little Lord Fauntleroy character, the narrator, this Marcel. And he's in bed waiting for his mother to come up and kiss him, and she won't because she's entertaining guests.
Right.
So he's this hysterical, it's quite funny. And Mama won't come up and kiss me. And it goes on for 60 bloody pages.
Right.
Now, I understand why a lot of people reading this God, they want to strangle him.
Yeah.
But then suddenly, around 60 pages, he's then an adult. It flips and he's an adult. And he's at an auntie's house and he dips this little cake in tea. And a memory comes flooding back. And it's called, he had this theory of involuntary memory, and it was based upon, there was a French philosopher called Henri Bergson, who developed the concepts of duration.
Yes.
So it's all about, guess what? The book's called In Search of Lost Time. It's about time. So you have to suffer 60 pages of this little Lord Fauntleroy being a spoiled little brat. But then you get this amazing, insightful, all these involuntary memories come flooding back because the cake he's eating as an adult reminds him of something that happened many, many decades earlier.
Good psychotherapeutic lesson.
But the point is, he said, if you try and the key thing is it's involuntary.
Yes.
You can't control it.
Yes.
And any memories you have conscious control over have been filtered through your consciousness, your subconscious. Whereas involuntary memories, and then throughout the book, throughout 4,000 odd pages, there are a periodic moments. It's like a symphony. There's a rhythm. And one of these memories, one of these events will happen. I think there's about 13 throughout the 4,000 pages. And in amongst all that, there's one particular item that we talked about, sadism. He's a little boy and he's outside some bedroom. He's fallen asleep in a garden. And they've described a father has died, and he was a snob. And he was a composer, a music teacher. And he had a daughter who he absolutely idolized. His wife had died and left him traumatized, idolizes the daughter. He's obsessed about how he appears to people. And his daughter has a lesbian affair, and her lover comes into the house while he's still alive. So he's shamed in front of the whole town in those days. But he puts up with it because he loves his daughter so much. He dies. And the boy is in the garden. It's a bit convoluted the way he ends up in the garden, but he can see into the bedroom. And they start fooling around, but there's a photograph of the father. And the daughter says to her lover, and encourages her to spit on the photograph as part of this sadistic game playing.
Right.
And all that father has done, it went against every value he held dear about his social status. He backed his daughter. And even when he's dead, she gets a sadistic kick. And again, you've read about this little Lord Fauntleroy prancing about the French countryside. And then all of a sudden, you've got one of the darkest bits of sadism I've read in literature.
Yeah.
There is psychologically, and he discusses the sadism, the enjoyment of encouraging someone to spit on a photograph. And one of the points I'd like to make is without the endless pages of this little Lord Fauntleroy prancing about, it wouldn't be so affecting.
No, you can't get there quickly.
And that's a point. So to take back to life coaching, everyone wants a quick fix.
Yeah.
Everyone wants an immediate problem to your solutions.
Yes.
But how about you learn that if you actually work as something like getting fit requires effort, mental health, psychological insight takes effort. And to get that level of insight and then to see over 4,000 pages how someone can construct a rhythm like music, that is, and yeah, I know it's a ball ache to read that many, but if you did the 10 hours a week of reading.
Interesting. You're preaching to the choir here. I have this thing that I say to people about reading, because Tyler, who was in yesterday, he's now bought the Brothers Karamazov and he's going to read. He's a bodybuilder. And he's also, he sends me texts and he's asking about Nietzsche. How do I understand this? What does it mean? So we have like a back and forth on that. And what I've been saying to people is, if you literally want to improve the quality of your consciousness and your thinking, what I found is reading helps, even if it's boring. You got me to read a Kafka book. I didn't enjoy it. But when I read it, the thoughts I had afterwards, because my brain's going, what's this? Why is he talking about? Who's that? The quality of my thoughts went up. When I scroll Instagram or TikTok, the quality of my thinking goes down. And I was like, why is that? Well, in this scenario, when I'm reading a book I don't really understand, I'm not really enjoying, or Life and Fate, which was a fairly hard slog, my brain is active. And it's interacting and it's pulling. I have to, what's he saying? What's this weird Russian reference to who, to what? My brain's there pulling these pieces together. It's talking to itself. It's talking to its representation of the author. It's active. When I'm scrolling Instagram, the content, the AI, the algorithms, they're actually thinking for me and they're feeling for me. It's like Zizek's laughter track concept. It's
canned laughter. Yeah.
Canned laughter. It's doing everything for me. And I'm like, when I do this and I'm scrolling, I am a wank sock for Satan's jizz. That I'm doing nothing. I'm receiving evil spunk into my brain. When I'm reading not a hard, like the Kafka book's not a hard text, but I just didn't like his nasty little world. I just didn't. But I went there because I knew we'd have this conversation. I wanted to say I read it. And the quality of my thinking afterwards improved. And even my desire to write, my desire to create, everything improved. When I do that, when I follow that exercise, when I do this,
I'll tell you a quick story about Valmar Shalamov. Is a Russian writer. And I read one of his short stories. It was quite funny. This is how, it's backing up what you're saying, but it's also, if I could be evangelical to people, it would be, there is joy to be found in darkness. And the example I want to give is, I was doing some research into people who in the death camps, both the Nazi death camps and the Stalinist death camps, actually found literature to be incredibly, you'd think, well, what could be less useful? And Primo Levi, If This Was a Man, I think his book was, where he's in Auschwitz, and he has a conversation with a friend, and he gets to talk to him about Dante's Divine Comedy. And he's quoting bits to him. He said he was never more alive because it meant something that amidst all this inhumanity, he could access something that gave him a sense of humanity.
Yes.
But this Shalamov, he wrote a short story, and it's just very economically called Marcel Proust. So he's in Kolyma, one of the prison camps, and there's a nurse. He's sat on a concrete bench, and he's found a volume of Proust, and he puts it down next to him, and he's talking to this nurse that he recognizes from his past, and she's quite an attractive woman. And he says, "What are you doing here? The death camp, or the work camp, sorry. You're a nurse." She said, "Well, I refused to sleep with one of my bosses on the outside, so I got sent here." So he chats to her, and then she leaves, and the book's gone. And he's devastated. And then a few weeks later, he sees her again, and she's a shadow of the person she was. She looks terrible. And he goes, "What's wrong?" And she goes, "I've been sent here for good now because I've got syphilis." And he goes, "Well, how the hell did you get that?" And she goes, "Well, I slept with the guy who runs your camp because she'd been sent to the camps because she wouldn't sleep. Now she'd had to sleep with someone. She's got syphilis." And she goes, "And by the way, I was the one who stole your book." Full stop.
Thanks.
It's only about 4 or 5 pages.
Yeah.
And I read the title thinking, this will be about how Proust helped him in prison. And it's the most, you just think you've been punched in the stomach.
Yes.
And he kicks you in the head.
Yeah.
And there must be part of me who is a Russian peasant.
Yeah.
Because I find this, not funny is the wrong word.
Yeah.
But I warm to be that dark. You have to have a sense of humour.
Yes. Yes.
And there's a level, and Solzhenitsyn basically, Zizek slags Solzhenitsyn off and says if he was any good, he would have written like Shalamov. And Solzhenitsyn on the back of the book gives an endorsement and says, to be fair, but words to the effect of in Russian, to be fair, Shalamov writes about the awfulness of the camps better than I do. So if you find Solzhenitsyn too heartwarming, read Shalamov.
Go one level darker. We're coming into the last few minutes now. Life and Faith. Did you finish that?
I'm about page 250, and then I got distracted. But I promise you, faithfully, I will finish it.
There's 2 passages from that book that I decided early last year I wanted to read on the Philosophy Channel.
Yeah.
They both involve. Well, one's a description of entering a gas chamber from a. They're both from a woman's point of view. It's written by a man, Vitaly Grossman. And the other one, I can't even talk about because I'll start welling up. Is a letter written by a mother to her son, and she knows she's going to die. And I wanted to read this on the Philosophy Channel, and then October the 7th happened, and I thought I can't share that because if I share that, there'll be spam comments underneath these beautiful, heartbreaking pieces of writing that will just say "Free Palestine, Free Palestine, Free Palestine" with Palestinian flags. And the point of wanting to read it is to say, this is hard literature. This, if you can listen to this and not be moved, you're made of stone. I want to share it with you. And it's not about being pro any team. It's not like I'm pro-Jewish, I'm pro-Muslim. It's not that. It's a horrifying human experience, an appeal to say, let's never do this again. But I can't. Because you know what will happen if I do that. Well,
except this is, I'd like to, my final contribution I'd love to be is this idea that what I think, and I wish the Jewish community would do more of this. Who am I to tell them what to do?
Yeah.
But I think there's a temptation, and I understand why you have to do it. You have to go on YouTube, you have to go on TV and defend what Israel's doing, and you have to, you go into defensive mode. But if the dust ever does clear, I just wish the Jewish community would do more with in the West to bring people like Bielik, the poet, to people's consciousness. It's exactly the point you've just made.
Yeah.
If people read In the City of Slaughter,
Yeah.
I challenge you, and then you forget the spamming idiots, the trolls.
Yeah.
But you'll get through to quite a few people, and they still may not be convinced. They're never going to be fans of the IDF.
Yes.
But you say, read that Bielik poem, and then look me in the face and say, you don't understand a little bit more how Jewish people think.
Yeah.
And that's how I think you're going to win the hearts and minds. It may never, I'm very pessimistic, I'm not an optimist, but I think if you're ever going to achieve anything, it's actually not through trying to debate people on YouTube, because it's parallel monologues. People don't listen anymore.
No.
But if you can make them read Grossman, read Bielik, and get a sense that, hang on, and it may not affect them for a couple of months afterwards, but trust me, like a Proustian involuntary memory, powerful literature hits you over the head.
Oh, God. It's transformative, honestly. Just thinking about it, it's like...
Yeah, so I think that in terms of bang for buck, the irony is I think the most effective, productive thing people can do is the weirdest abstruse poetry.
Yeah.
It's the thing that you think least of. And if people think I'm mad, I just repeat.
They do.
Fine. But you read the people in the death camps, you read Viktor Frankl, and he said the people who survived the death camps, the strongest, weren't big muscly men. He said there were people with a sense of meaning.
Yeah.
Primo Levi, unfortunately, ended up committing suicide on the outside, but he survived the horrors of Auschwitz by partly keeping in his head Dante.
Right.
Now, my point would be, if literature is so useful, you've said to me, I'll keep going back to the question, why read?
Yeah.
If Dante can keep someone through the inferno, I use the word advisedly, the inferno of Auschwitz, that is pretty powerful. When people think literature doesn't have any use, you or I would be snowflaks in a desert sun in Auschwitz. We wouldn't last seconds. No. But these people survived the horrors.
Yeah.
What? By being able to recall great literature that gave them a sense of humanity.
Yes.
Now, no, flicking through a phone will ever give you that.
Can't.
Trying to debate someone who's decided before they even begin speaking to you, they're not going to listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the only way. I don't think there is much hope left, but if there is any hope, it's in Shalamov and syphilitic nurses stealing Proust.
And on that note, we probably should leave it. Dr. Paul, thank you very much for coming in again. It's always a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.